The morning sun cast long shadows across the Chicago skyline, its golden light glinting off the glass facade of Sterling & Cole's towering headquarters. Inside, the air buzzed with the frenetic energy of a Monday in late August, where ambition and urgency collided in a symphony of clicking keyboards and clipped voices. Executives in tailored suits darted through the marble-floored lobby, their conversations a steady hum of deals, deadlines, and corporate conquests. Amid this orchestrated chaos, Clara Thompson slipped through a side entrance, her cleaning cart creaking under the weight of mops, rags, and a battered bucket of cleaning supplies. At 57, Clara was a fixture in the building, her navy uniform faded from years of wear, her graying hair pulled into a tight bun. She moved with the quiet precision of someone who had mastered the art of going unnoticed, her presence as unremarkable to the company's elite as the polished floors she maintained. To the executives, she was just the janitor, someone to offer a curt nod if they acknowledged her at all. But Clara carried a secret, a truth so seismic it could topple the carefully constructed hierarchy of Sterling & Cole. For 12 years she had nurtured it, guarding it with the patience of a woman who understood the power of timing. Today, as she navigated the fluorescent-lit hallways, a quiet fire burned beneath her calm exterior. She was nearing her breaking point, and the weight of her secret felt heavier than ever. Clara's days followed a rhythm as steady as a metronome. She arrived at dawn before the first wave of employees flooded the building and set to work polishing the glass doors until they gleamed like mirrors. She vacuumed the plush carpets in the executive suites, their deep burgundy fibers swallowing the hum of her machine. She tidied desks littered with coffee cups, crumpled memos, and half-finished reports, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The work was demanding, but Clara took pride in it, even if no one else noticed. She overheard snippets of conversations as she worked, talk of multi-million-dollar mergers, promotions dangled like bait, and the occasional barb about a colleague's misstep. Most days, she let the words wash over her, focusing on the task at hand. But this morning, a particular exchange pierced her focus. She wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally, but the voices were loud, careless, spilling from an open office door. "The shareholders' meeting next week is a done deal," a senior manager boasted, his tone thick with arrogance. "Richard's got the board wrapped around his finger. No one's got the spine to challenge him." Clara's grip tightened on her mop handle, her knuckles whitening for a fleeting moment. She knew something they didn't. They were wrong, blissfully, arrogantly wrong. But she didn't let her thoughts linger. There were still offices to clean, and she needed to be ready for what lay ahead. Sterling & Cole was a titan in Chicago's corporate landscape, its sleek headquarters a symbol of success plastered across business magazines and glossy websites. The building's glass exterior reflected the city's ambition, a monument to wealth and power. Inside, however, the reality was far less polished. The company's culture was ruthless, a Darwinian ecosystem where ambition trumped ethics and loyalty was a one-way street. Clara had spent 12 years in those halls, watching from the shadows. She saw promotions handed to those who shouted loudest, not those who worked hardest. She overheard whispers of backroom deals, contracts awarded to friends, expenses padded with fictitious charges, and mistakes buried by blaming the powerless. At the helm was Richard Hayes, the CEO, a man whose charisma masked a ruthless streak. His voice dominated boardrooms, his sharp tongue silencing even the boldest dissenters. To Richard, people were tools valuable only as long as they served his vision of success. Clara had heard his biting remarks about employees who didn't fit his mold. "Why is she still here?" he'd once snapped about a veteran receptionist, her decades of service reduced to a liability. "She's a relic. No value to the brand." The disrespect wasn't limited to words. Sterling & Cole's practices were riddled with ethical rot. Bonuses for low-level staff were quietly slashed, even as executives toasted record profits at lavish galas. Expense reports were inflated with impunity, and a whistleblower who dared to speak up was forced out with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. The cleaning crew, Clara included, bore the brunt of the company's callousness. She'd seen colleagues reduced to tears after being berated for a smudge on a window or a forgotten trash can. Their wages had stagnated for years, even as workloads grew with the company's expansion. And then there was the way people treated them like furniture, not humans. Clara still remembered a day 2 years ago when a junior analyst, Emily, spilled soda on the marble floor outside Richard's office. The young woman froze her eyes wide with panic as Richard rounded the corner. "Clean this up!" he barked at Clara, who was passing by with her cart. "And you," he turned to Emily, "watch where you're going." Emily stammered an apology. Her face flushed, but Richard was already gone, leaving Clara to mop up the sticky mess. Clara didn't say a word. She never did. But the moment seared itself into her memory, another stone added to a growing pile. Those moments had piled up over the years, each one a quiet wound. Clara wasn't immune to the sting of being overlooked, the exhaustion of being invisible. She felt the weight of every dismissive glance, every condescending tone. But she wasn't one to break. Instead, she let those slights fuel her, storing them like kindling for a fire she knew would one day blaze. She watched, listened, and learned her silence, a shield and a weapon. The more she saw, the clearer it became. Sterling & Cole's success was built on the backs of people it refused to value. The cleaning staff, the receptionists, the interns. They were the heartbeat of the company, yet they were treated as disposable. Clara wasn't just observing. She was planning, piecing together a strategy that would shake the company to its core. Her secret was one she'd carried since her husband James passed away 6 years earlier. James had been a quiet investor in Sterling & Cole's early days, buying shares when the company was a risky startup with little more than a bold idea. He'd seen potential where others saw folly, and by the time of his death, those shares had grown into a majority stake, giving Clara control over the company's future. At first, she'd been overwhelmed. She was no corporate strategist. She was a mother of 3, a woman who'd worked as a school cafeteria worker, a retail clerk, and now a janitor to make ends meet. She'd raised her children in a modest apartment in Chicago's South Side, teaching them resilience and kindness through years of struggle. But as she continued her work at Sterling & Cole, she realized the power of her position. Being invisible was her strength. She could move through the office unnoticed, hear things others wouldn't, and gather the pieces of a puzzle no one else saw. She wasn't just a janitor. She was the most powerful person in the building, and no one had a clue. The turning point came one humid August evening as Clara wiped down the mahogany table in the executive lounge. The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the bleach and ammonia of her cleaning supplies. 2 vice presidents lingered over glasses of whiskey, their laughter sharp and careless. "Layoffs are a breeze," one said, swirling his glass. "Cut the dead weight, and no one bats an eye. These people think their jobs are their lives." The other chuckled. "Replaceable, all of them." Clara stood frozen behind the door, her cleaning rag limp in her hand. These weren't just numbers. They were people with mortgages, kids' dreams. People like her friend Maria, a fellow janitor who'd been with the company for 15 years, raising 2 daughters on her own. People like Emily, the analyst, who'd spilled the soda, who worked late nights to prove her worth. To these men, they were nothing. Clara's heart pounded, not with anger, but with clarity. She couldn't stay silent any longer. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table in her small apartment, a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside her. The apartment was quiet, her children long grown and moved out, leaving only the hum of a distant L train to fill the silence. She pulled out a worn notebook, its pages filled with grocery lists and reminders, and began writing with purpose. She listed every injustice she'd witnessed, the slights, the unethical deals, the silenced voices. She recalled the time Maria had been docked a day's pay for calling in sick to care for her daughter. She remembered the whispered complaints about harassment buried by HR to protect the powerful. She thought of the whistleblower, a young accountant named David, who'd been forced out after questioning a shady client deal. By dawn, her notebook was a map of the company's sins, and Clara had the outline of a plan. It wasn't just about exposing the rot at Sterling and Cole. It was about rebuilding it into something better, something human. Clara's first step was to gather evidence. Her job gave her access to places others overlooked: conference rooms, after-hours desks cluttered with forgotten papers, even the shredder bins where careless executives tossed sensitive documents. She wasn't stealing. She was collecting truths, piecing together a case that could withstand scrutiny. She noted conversations, memorized schedules, and glanced at emails left open on screens. One night, she found a memo detailing a plan to outsource the cleaning staff's jobs to a cheaper contractor despite record profits. Another time, she overheard a manager bragging about inflating a client invoice to fund a personal trip. Each fragment was a thread in the tapestry. She was weaving a portrait of a company that had lost its way. Her second step was to seek allies. Clara wasn't naive. She knew she couldn't do this alone. She reached out to a small circle of trusted friends: Linda, a lawyer from her church who specialized in corporate law; Mark, a financial analyst who'd worked at Sterling and Cole years ago and left after clashing with Richard; and David, the whistleblower, who now ran a small consulting firm. Over coffee at a diner in Logan Square, Clara shared fragments of her findings, careful not to reveal her full hand. Linda helped her understand the legal weight of her evidence, Mark analyzed the financial records, and David provided insight into the company's inner workings. Together, they refined her strategy, turning her observations into a weapon. They warned her of the risks: legal battles, public scrutiny, even personal threats. But Clara was undeterred. She'd faced harder battles, like the years after James's death, when she'd worked double shifts to keep her family afloat. This was just another fight, and she was ready. The final step was the hardest: preparing herself. Clara wasn't used to the spotlight. She was a woman of quiet strength, not grand gestures. She practiced her speech in her bathroom mirror, her voice soft, but steady, as if testing its weight. "You are enough," she whispered to her reflection, echoing the words James used to say when doubt crept in. She thought of her children: Michael, now a teacher; Sarah, a nurse; and Daniel, a mechanic who'd watched her work tirelessly without complaint. This wasn't just for her. It was for them, for Maria, for Emily, for every person who'd been dismissed by Sterling and Cole's greed. Clara wasn't fearless, but she was resolute. She'd spent years carrying the weight of invisibility. Now she would use it to change everything. The shareholders' meeting was set for a crisp September morning, and the office thrummed with anticipation. Executives strode through the halls, their confidence palpable, their laughter ringing with the certainty of another profitable year. Clara pushed her cart toward the top-floor boardroom, her face as unreadable as ever. The room was a study in opulence: mahogany, paneling, a long table polished to a mirror shine, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing Chicago's skyline. Richard Hayes sat at the head, his posture commanding, his smile sharp as a blade. The board members, a mix of gray-haired men and polished women, chatted easily, their voices laced with self-assurance. Clara entered quietly, placing a tray of water glasses on a side table. No one looked her way. She was just the help after all. But this time she didn't leave. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the room's low chatter. Heads turned, some annoyed, others confused. Richard barely glanced up, his eyes flicking to her with mild irritation. "We're busy here," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "I know," Clara replied, her tone unshaken. "That's why I'm here." Richard's eyes narrowed, a smirk tugging at his lips. Unless you're here to mop the floor, I suggest you go. Clara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, pulling a thick folder from her cart and placing it on the table with a soft thud. The Sterling & Cole logo stared up at the room alongside the words, "Shareholders Report." The air grew heavy, the silence sudden and sharp. For 12 years, I've watched this company profit by stepping on the people who keep it running. Clara began, her voice rising with quiet authority. I've seen employees belittled, ethical lines crossed, and profits worshipped over people. I've stayed silent until now. Murmurs rippled through the room. A board member, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward, peering at the folder. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. Clara opened the folder, revealing neatly organized documents, emails, financial records, employee complaints. "This is proof," she said. "Proof of inflated expenses, unethical layoffs, harassment buried to protect the powerful." Richard's laugh was sharp, forced. "You're a janitor," he spat, his voice rising. "Who do you think you are?" Clara met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I'm Clara Thompson, majority shareholder of Sterling & Cole, and today, I'm firing you." The room erupted in chaos. Richard's face drained of color, his smirk replaced by shock. "This is absurd," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You're joking." Clara didn't blink. "No, Mr. Hayes, I'm not." She turned to the board, her presence commanding in a way no one could ignore. "I've spent years documenting this company's failures. The evidence is here, every unethical deal, every silenced complaint. I have the votes to remove him, and I'm using them." The board members scrambled to review the folder, their whispers frantic. Richard tried to argue, his voice rising with desperation, but the evidence was damning. Clara had been thorough, her allies meticulous. Linda's legal expertise ensured every document was airtight, Mark's analysis highlighted financial discrepancies, and David's insights exposed the cover-ups. The vote was swift, unanimous. By noon, Richard Hayes was escorted from the building, his protests echoing down the hall. Clara stood alone in the boardroom, the Chicago skyline glittering beyond the windows. The executives who had once ignored her now looked at her with a mix of awe and unease. She didn't care for their approval. She had work to do. The news of Richard's ousting spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the office was alive with whispers. The janitor, the majority shareholder. How had no one known? The cleaning crew, once invisible, walked a little taller. Maria, Clara's friend, pulled her aside in the break room, her eyes shining. "You did it," she whispered. "You did it for all of us." Clara smiled, her voice warm. "We're doing it together." In the weeks that followed, Clara didn't return to her mop and bucket. She stepped into a new role, not as a CEO, but as a leader of change. She raised wages for the cleaning staff and other overlooked workers, ensuring they could live with dignity. She overhauled HR policies, bringing in an independent firm to handle complaints with transparency. She introduced training on ethics and inclusion, dismantling the toxic culture Richard had fostered. But she didn't stop there. Clara held town hall meetings, inviting everyone from interns to managers to share their ideas. She listened, her notebook always in hand, ensuring every voice mattered. Emily, the analyst who'd spilled the soda, approached her one afternoon, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You've changed everything," she said. Clara shook her head. "We're changing it together." One evening, as Clara walked through the office, she paused by the lobby's glass doors. The city lights sparkled outside, a reminder of how far she'd come. She thought of James, of the quiet strength he'd seen in her. She thought of her children, who'd called her after the news, broke their voices thick with pride. She thought of the people she'd fought for, the ones who'd never been seen until now. Clara had done the impossible, not by shouting, but by listening, planning and acting when the time was right. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a force, a reminder that power doesn't always wear a suit or sit at the head of a table. Sometimes it pushes a cart, wipes down desks, and waits for its moment. Clara's story isn't just about one woman's triumph. It's a call to see the unseen, to value the overlooked, and to believe in the power of quiet resolve. The next time you pass someone in the background, a janitor, a cashier, a face you barely notice, pause. You might be standing next to the most powerful person in the room.